dramatic landscapes. I mean, you hear that, you think like towering mountains, right? Or maybe like the ocean, something vast. But today, we're going somewhere different. We're heading to the Guiana Highlands.
Guiana Highlands?
Yeah, in southeastern Venezuela. And get this. Picture these flat-topped mountains, these tepus, rising up out of the rainforest and savanna. Like, seriously, they look like ancient fortresses.
They really do.
I mean, doesn't that just make you wonder what kind of stories a place like that holds?
You can't help but wonder.
When it turns out it holds a lot. We're talking about rock art, like those silent markings left behind by people, way back when, offering us like a little peek into their lives.
Right. It's fascinating. I mean, think about it. Just the presence of those tepus alone, those often mist-shrouded, almost mystical mountains. It's easy to imagine them having this incredible power, a sense of place for the people who lived among them.
Oh, for sure. Like, they're not just mountains, are they? They're practically monuments.
Exactly. So when we find rock art in a setting like that, it's not just about deciphering the images themselves. It's about understanding the whole picture, the people, the art, and this dramatically unique environment all woven together.
Okay, so that brings us to what we're diving into today, a brand new discovery of rock art in the Arauák River Valley, near this tepe called Upuigma in Bolivar State, Venezuela. And our guide for this deep dive is a recent article from Rock Art Research. Now, what's really cool is that this site features both pictograms, the painted ones, and petroglyphs, the engravings.
Oh, that's interesting because, sometimes those different techniques, they can point to different time periods or even different groups of people. So finding them together, that's like getting more complete story, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a richer tapestry, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in the Arauák River Valley, and off in the distance, we see Upuigma Tepui. This one, it's about 860 meters above sea level. But the rock art, it's not actually on the Tepui itself. It's on this lone boulder in the savanna. A boulder, huh?
Yeah, but it's not just any boulder.
Right. The researchers, they describe it so vividly. This big boulder standing alone, surrounded by these little ravines, and critically, there's a freshwater spring nearby.
Essential, right?
Yeah, essential. And its location. It overlooks the whole savanna with clear views of other tepus, Acopan, Upuigma itself, and Angasima.
Okay, so it's not just a water source, it's a lookout point too. Not so isolated after all. And I'm looking at the article here. It says it's also between the Arauák and Pérez rivers, which, as they point out, would have been prime spots for animals migrating through the area.
Oh, totally. A natural corridor.
Yeah, so suddenly this boulder is looking less like a random rock and more like a prime location, maybe for hunting.
Makes sense, right. And all around it, you've got this typical savanna vegetation, grasses, bushes, and the boulder itself, it's covered in algae, lichen, moss.
All pretty common in this environment. It's a sizable boulder, too, about 40 meters in diameter, 8 to 12 meters high. And get this, it's got this very distinct crack running north to south, almost cuts it in half.
So that's probably why the art isn't just out in the open, right?
You got it. It's mainly in these natural overhangs, like little shelters. The article mentions a few different locations, even a small cave without any art, but there's one area on the south side that really stands out.
They call it the shelter panel. Sounds like a key spot.
Yeah, it's large, 8 meters long, 4 meters wide, 6 meters high, good protection from the weather. And they found soot on the overhanging rock, which suggests fires were lit there. Campfires, probably.
So people were living there?
At least temporarily, it seems so. There was fine sand on the ground, no signs of animal disturbances, really reinforces that idea.
Not just a blank canvas, but a living space. I also noticed the researchers even mapped the boulder and the art locations. They use a windrose diagram. And you mentioned earlier that the boulder acts as a kind of watershed, right?
Yeah, between two rivers flowing in opposite directions.
That really makes it seem central to the whole area.
Oh, absolutely. It emphasizes its importance in the landscape. Now, the article dives deep into the different panels of rock art they found. Each one has its own unique features.
Okay, so let's break those down. First up, principal panel. That sounds pretty major.
It is. It's horizontal, facing west, has a good overhang for protection, smooth, dry surface, and most of the paintings are in the lower half, although some reach up pretty high, like 3 meters. They think it was mostly finger painting with red-orange ochre. But here's the thing. Most of the images, they're not figurative.
Meaning what? Not like animals or people?
Right, more like patterns. dots, these feather-like shapes called penniforms, tectiforms, which are kind of like simplified huts, crosses called cruciforms. Then there are claviforms, club-like shapes, pectiforms, those are cone-like, scalariforms, those look like ladders, and some simple squares and triangles.
Wow, that's a lot of geometric shapes. And the article mentions something called superimposition. What's that all about?
Well, that's when you find one image painted right over another one.
Oh, I see.
And it's really helpful for understanding the timeline because it tells us that this panel, it was used again and again over time, different people adding their markings, like layers of history right on the rock.
Wow, that's amazing. Like a palimpsest, but with rock art.
Mm.
And they even found, I see here, a charcoal marking from 1947, left by an explorer.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, so a little piece of recent history mixed in with the ancient.
Right. Okay, so next up is the yellow panel.
Mm-hmm.
This one sounds unique because of the rock surface itself.
Yeah, it's in this smaller overhang,
Yeah.
shaped like a half tube, and it's got this distinctly yellow color, probably mineral deposits. They think the finger painting technique is similar to the principal panel, but some of the red-orange marks are darker.
Maybe the ochre changed over time.
Could be. Again, they saw those superimposed patterns, which reinforces that this wasn't just a one-time thing. This site was revisited. The motifs are similar, too. Dots, tectiforms, penniforms. But there's one really interesting image, a complex, labyrinth-like geometric figure.
A labyrinth. That's so cool.
Oh.
I wonder what that symbolizes. Now, let's move on to the shelter panel. The one in the main sheltered area where they found evidence of campfires.
Right, that one. The surface is fairly smooth and dry, and they think maybe they use broader strokes here, maybe even whole hands, to apply the ochre. Superimposition is evident here, too. The colors are similar to the principal panel. But here we start to see some more figurative elements. Anthropomorphs, those are human-like figures, and serpentiforms, which are snake-like.
Ooh, snakes.
Yeah, snakes. And of course, some of those non-figurative motifs we talked about. But there's one that stands out, a therianthrope. That's a figure that's part human, part animal.
Part human, part animal. That's got to have some deep meaning.
You often see those in rock art around the world. They often have mythological or spiritual significance.
And the soot here, that really connects this panel to people actually living in this shelter. The article also mentions that some of the motifs are way up high, like they must have needed ladders or ropes to reach them.
Yeah, imagine that. Shows how important it was to them to put those images there.
Definitely. Now let's talk about the aerial panel.
The aerial panel.
This one is, let's just say, hard to reach, like 7 meters off the ground.
That's quite a climb.
So what's special about this one?
Well, for one, it's really well preserved, probably because it's so hard to get to. The rock surface has this silica-like layer, and there are paintings both under and on top of it. That could be helpful for dating later on. The style, it's similar to what we've seen, dot patterns, scalariforms, tectiforms. Not much superimposition or disturbances here.
So it's like a hidden gallery. Then there's a leaf motif, which sounds a little more recognizable.
Yeah, this one is near the aerial panel and could be a plant, a feather, or just lines. It's high up, too, on a boulder. Same style, same red-orange color. No obvious superimposition at first glance, but they did find some faded shapes underneath, claviforms and others, and it's pretty well preserved despite some wasp nests.
Okay, a lone leaf, high up. Interesting. Then we have the mineral accretion panel. This one sounds a bit tricky to see.
It is. It's part of the yellow panel, but covered in mineral deposits, probably from water seeping through a crack. The paintings are really hard to see, but they use this technique called de-stretch to enhance the images.
De-stretch?
Yeah, it's a digital image enhancement technique. And here's why this panel is exciting. Those mineral accretions, they could be radiocarbon dated, which would give us a minimum age for the paintings underneath.
Ooh, so it's like a hidden time capsule. Finally, there's the circles panel right near the yellow panel. What's on this one?
As you might guess, circles. Plus dot patterns and some clamp-like motifs. Same style, the red-orange ochre is a bit faded in places. One of the circles actually uses a natural circular depression in the rock. And they found mineral accretion here, too, and de-stretch revealed some superimposed images. It's pretty well preserved overall.
Okay, so circles and dots, a recurring theme. It's amazing how each panel is unique, but with these shared elements. Now, the big question, what can we learn from all this? What can we interpret?
The million-dollar question in rock art research. And the authors are pretty upfront about it. We can't know for sure what everything means. But they do highlight the fact that there are a lot of non-figurative motifs, which is something you see in other rock art sites in Venezuela and northern South America. Most common ones here were claviforms, dot patterns, penniforms, Y signs, and tectiforms.
So these abstract shapes, they're not random.
Right. And that suggests some shared cognitive abilities, maybe even beliefs, among the people who made them.
It's so tempting to try to assign meanings. Like, a circle is the sun, dots are stars. But it sounds like it's more complex than that.
It is. The article really stresses the need to be careful about interpretations. You can't just project modern ideas onto these ancient images.
Makes sense.
Yeah, there might have been some shared symbolic language in this region, but we can't assume everything meant the same thing everywhere. The authors talk about different ways researchers try to understand rock art, like iconographic studies, where you try to identify specific depictions, ethnographic approaches, where you look at the practices of living indigenous groups for clues, and then, of course, scientific analysis, like dating and pigment identification.
So multiple approaches. And they also mention this idea of universal motifs.
Right, that some basic geometric shapes might be fundamental to human perception, like those swirling patterns you see if you rub your eyes.
Oh yeah, I know those.
Some researchers believe those could be the basis for some of these abstract shapes across different cultures.
Fascinating. And it seems like the local indigenous communities today, they're not familiar with this site.
No, which makes those ethnographic connections harder to make.
Right. The authors do mention some specific theories, like Benrick's ideas about fertility, hunting magic, healing, and even those phosphine motifs we were talking about.
These are all interesting possibilities. They also mention Gell's perspective, where art has its own kind of agency, and Reichel Dolmatov's view, which connects rock art to shamanism.
Shamanism. That makes me think of the therianthrope, that part human, part animal figure.
Yeah, the connection between the human and animal worlds, very common in shamanistic beliefs. So while we might not be able to say for sure what every symbol means, by considering different theories and looking for patterns, we can start to build a better understanding of the context of this art. Now, the researchers also looked at this site in relation to other rock art in the region, right?
They did. And it turns out there's a long history of rock art discoveries in the Guiana Highlands.
Yeah, going all the way back to the 17th century. They mention early explorers like Van Berkel and even Alexander von Humboldt. But the article points out that while Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana have good records of their rock art, the upper Caroni River region in Venezuela hasn't been as well documented. So this new discovery really helps fill in that gap.
And it's not just this one site, is it? They found more rock art in the Canema region.
Yeah, both pictograms and petroglyphs. And these weren't previously recorded. What's interesting is that they've noticed similarities in the designs and techniques used here and in rock art from the Caribbean, particularly the Middle Orinoco region.
Really?
Which suggests some possible connections between those areas. But they also point out that rock art in the Caroni River Basin itself is still pretty poorly understood.
So much more to learn. And the article talks about the challenges of studying Venezuelan petroglyphs in general. They're often in these remote, hard-to-reach places.
Yeah, the landscape makes it tough. But the general idea is that a lot of the petroglyphs in this region might share some common origins and purposes, and the variations in design. They might just be personal styles or local traditions.
Makes sense. So wrapping up, what are the main takeaways from this study of the Upuigma rock shelter?
Well, it seems like this boulder was an important place for the ancient people who lived in this area, hunter-gatherers. The location suggests it could have been a shelter, a base for hunting and gathering, and maybe even a place for rituals. And that prominent position, it would have been a natural landmark.
And of course, that crack in the boulder probably helped create those overhangs, right?
Right, making it an even better shelter. It also seems like the rock surface wasn't specially prepared before painting, and they think they've found a possible source for the ochre nearby. The fact that there are so many non-figurative motifs and that they're repeated could point to some kind of ritualistic meaning. And those stylistic similarities with other sites in Venezuela and the Guianas, they suggest a broader artistic tradition in this region.
It's like a snapshot of a whole society, isn't it? Living in this incredible landscape, using this natural feature for practical needs and maybe spiritual expression.
That's a great way to put it. But it's important to remember this is just the first step. The researchers emphasize that this is preliminary research. There's so much more to discover. And get this, they mention finding new rock art sites near Canema with similar features. They even think there might have been ancient travel routes between these areas. They're planning another article about it.
Wow, that's exciting. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. And it's great that they're involving local communities with this idea for a community engagement project and a museum.
That's so important for the long-term protection and understanding of these sites.
Okay, so for you, our listener, let's sum up what we've learned in this deep dive into the rock art of the Arauák River Valley. We've explored a remarkable news site, a complex of rock shelters with both paintings and engravings, and it offers a fascinating glimpse into the lives and beliefs of the ancient people who called this place home.
We saw the incredible diversity of motifs, from those abstract patterns to those few but intriguing figurative images, like the theriathrope. The evidence of superimposition, it suggests a long history of use. And the stylistic links, they connect this site to a broader artistic tradition.
Now, here's a final thought for you to ponder. These non-figurative symbols, especially if they were connected to rituals, what were they trying to communicate? Was it a language we no longer understand? Was it a way to connect with the spiritual world, with nature? We encourage you to keep thinking about the mysteries held in these ancient images etched onto the rocks of the Guiana Highlands.
Let your imagination soar.